Seeing as this channel primarily focuses on Dead Rising 1, I would absolutely love to be able to show you all some extremely early in-development stuff, like early cutscenes of the game in a rough appearance. But unfortunately, we are not so lucky when it comes to the first game. The only existence of leftover prototype material is some early blockout levels, and some extremely early thumbnail images for the cases in the game, which show puppet-rigged models and incomplete lighting, but that's it. Development or placeholder material in the first game is not very common to find, and the content that does exist is like a drop of water in a desert. But luckily, during development of Dead Rising 2, Capcom would leave all sorts of placeholder and prototype material behind in some of their beta builds. Each time a new pre-release build of Dead Rising 2 is discovered, an ocean of new, never-before-seen content is found. Currently, the earliest build of Dead Rising 2 that has been discovered predates the launch by about half a year, and it includes a gigantic library of prototype cutscenes. These cutscenes are a draft, and are usually recorded from within the animation software itself. These drafts are meant to give a rough idea of what the final cutscene will look like. They usually play at a very low frame rate, and sometimes they are just a stop-motion visualization using puppet models or even storyboard illustrations, as the motion capture data is not yet completed. These cutscenes will often feature voices from random developers around the studio, instead of the actual voice actors, as it's easier to do that when the game is still heavily in production.
We got enough to do the job, let's go!
These cutscenes are for internal use only, and are not meant to be seen by the public. These cutscenes make it into a build so that testers can ensure they play when they're supposed to play. And it's not important that the cutscenes look visually impressive or finished in any way, which is why they look like a total mess.
What the fuck is that?
But seeing as we have a treasure chest in front of us with these early cutscenes, I figured it might be cool to take a little peek into the animation process of Dead Rising 2. The cutscenes we're gonna see today will vary between extremely early drafts to much more fleshed out renderings, and even some that are very similar to the finished scene, they are just noticeably still captured in an animation suite. You're even going to see cutscenes that never actually made it to fruition in the final game. There's going to be a mixed bag of base Dead Rising 2 cutscenes, Terror is Reality cutscenes, and even some from Case Zero, as that game was being developed roughly at the same time as the full game. The best place to start all of this would probably be with Chuck's introduction cutscene, which unsurprisingly still follows the same basic idea as the final game, it's just incredibly unfinished. Rather than a Terror is Reality employee, we see they simply used a model of Sergeant Boykin for whatever reason. His voice is also clearly recorded from a random Capcom developer, or likely even the animator himself.
Don't forget to include your next of kin.
We can see that the characters are basically just standing in a giant untextured box, which is nothing surprising as the game would also use similar looking environments as test maps. Chuck's motorcycle likely wasn't finished yet, and they're using the blue TIR one instead. Chuck also isn't wearing his TIR uniform, and he's instead wearing his usual outfit. Strangely, when Chuck drives off on his motorcycle, the cutscene then transitions into an even rougher draft for the rest of the scene. Rather than the actual in-game models, the scene just uses low-poly block characters. Again, nobody was ever meant to see this cutscene in such a rough shape, so no matter how silly it might look for the zombies to be cardboard cutouts, it's the easiest way to mock up a cutscene. Interestingly, within the same build, there's a later version of this part of the cutscene, which is still incredibly unfinished, but actually uses 3D models from the game. But that's not really saying much, as all of the motorcycle drivers are just duplicates of Chuck. Similarly, when TK arrives on stage, he's joined by two Stacys. His voice is also obviously not finished.
Do you think they have what it takes to earn the big money?
Now, characters that aren't in the places that they are meant to be in, such as with these Stacys, is going to be a theme for every single one of these cutscenes. There's a lot of reasons for this, but it's usually because the artwork or design for a specific character just isn't ready yet, and for the time being, animators will use any 3D model that they have available. Chuck talking to some random misplaced character in the changing room instead of a TIR contestant is pretty funny, but it's not really any more bizarre than seeing Stacy protesting with a bunch of untextured ghouls. If you've ever tried animating something to this level of complexity, you focus primarily on the core aspects of the scene first, such as the animations, the camera placement, and stuff like that. The finished character art and level design really only fits into the scene once the animators are ready to add it in. So while it may be pretty funny to see Chuck pull Rebecca out of a wireframe truck, that's just how animations are made. In some cutscenes, we even get to see very early character designs, such as the beta version of the twins, which rather than the gold and silver dresses they wear today, they instead sported blue and red corsets. Even TK had an early appearance with some makeup on his left eye. When it came to zombies, the animators often used untextured survivors as a placeholder, and sometimes the zombies will be using strange, misplaced textures, like having Chuck's outfit mapped over a female body, or just the skin color being a paint splatter mess. It's pretty easy for animators to understand that these are zombies and these are protagonists, so adding any more detail like that is not essential yet. Lots of cutscenes are also unfortunately so early that rather than an animation or a storyboard, they are just text on the screen. They offer us nothing really to see apart from the cutscene's name. Pre-release versions of Dead Rising 1 would do this as well, as when a cutscene was missing due to it being unfinished, it would just tell you that it can't be seen, and it was also very polite about it. When we try to align some early draft cutscenes with the final version, we can actually sometimes get a perfect side-by-side comparison, as the order of scenes play out exactly the same way. Other times, however, the ordering of scenes and the duration that a single camera angle plays for is completely different from the final game. There's one specific cutscene in this build labeled Ending E2-14, which was likely just a continuation of Ending D, but in this version, Chuck is arrested and flown out of Fortune City in a news helicopter, and then thrown into a jail cell. We then get a brief description about what happens afterwards, as Chuck is found guilty of the events of Fortune City. Chuck's jail outfit is probably one of the most disgusting 3D models I've ever seen, but again, nobody was supposed to see this cutscene. There's also a few test animations that don't really serve any purpose within the game. Most of these are just examples of Stacy and Katie being moved up and down in the final battle, or some tests of TK taunting the player. There's also cutscenes for Case Zero, which follow a pretty familiar pattern to what we've been seeing so far: untextured environments, early placeholder dialogue, and misplaced characters. There isn't much more to say about these Case Zero cutscenes, as it's the same formula we are now familiar with. But of course, it is one hell of a sight to see Chuck interacting with a man made of question marks.
Well, all right, a little one. Perfect to complete my collection.
But really, that's about all we can dissect with all of these prototype cutscenes. Seeing these cutscenes after all these years that Dead Rising 2 has been out is a treat, but it's not really any more interesting than seeing behind the scenes footage of any other game. Game developers nowadays are actually getting more comfortable with showing this kind of stuff, so seeing pre-viz cutscenes like this is slowly becoming pretty normal. Hell, watch any GDC panel footage of developers explaining their work on a game they made, and you'll be treated to hours of footage of that game in a pre-release state. But obviously, these Dead Rising 2 cutscenes came from a place where they were not supposed to be seen. They were purely data mined from a build of the game that nobody should have had access to. So there's a bit more of a charm there, and these cutscenes feel a bit more special and obscure. Hopefully you found this interesting and maybe even a bit useful, as it offers us a great glimpse into how games are made. Cutscenes are a very complicated process which takes the work of dozens of people and hundreds of hours. It really gives us something to look back on and see just how much work went into the game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.